Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the absolute chaos and the fascinating science of what really happens when water invades a building. You know, when a pipe bursts, it might look like a simple cleanup job. Just grab a mop, right? But mitigating water damage is actually this highly technical, intense operation where professionals are battling moisture on a literal molecular level.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with local threats, look at the ticking clock of an emergency, unpack the actual science of mitigation, walk through the 3 phases of recovery, and finally, navigate the realities of the aftermath.
All right, Section 1. Local threats and vulnerabilities. Independence's unique geographic risks.
To really understand how water attacks a structure, let's use the city of Independence, Missouri as our real-world laboratory. Up in the historic district, those old galvanized supply lines, they don't just crack. They corrode from the inside out, creating these sneaky, hidden pinhole leaks. But then, contrast that with the 1960s ranch homes built during the city's big expansion. A lot of those have polybutylene pipes. That material gets super brittle and just snaps without warning, dumping massive volumes of water in seconds.
And it's not just the plumbing. The environment itself is literally conspiring against these homes. Independence is right in the Missouri River floodplain, so you get these heavy spring storms dumping rain, but the local clay soil is super stubborn. It completely resists absorption. So what happens? That water channels straight toward the low points, turning basement window wells into giant collection pools. Add in wild winter freeze-thaw cycles, cracking pipes and unheated crawl spaces, and rising water tables creating hydrostatic pressure. Nature is constantly pushing groundwater straight through solid basement walls.
Moving on to Section 2, the ticking clock, a race against secondary damage.
If the environment is the bad guy here, the relentless ticking of the clock is the absolute worst enemy. 90. That is the magic number. Professional mitigation teams aim for a hard 90-minute limit when responding to a call. Why? Because untreated water damage literally doubles every single hour. Getting there in 90 minutes is the only way to stop water from bleeding into unaffected rooms before the whole thing spirals completely out of control.
And this brilliantly illustrates why that window is so tight. Look at this timeline. In hour 1, water is just rapidly soaking into your drywall and subfloors like a sponge. By hour 24, you've got massive humidity swings accelerating microbial threats. And right at that 48-hour mark, boom. Destructive mold growth officially begins. If you haven't started drying by hour 48, well, it's no longer just a water issue. You're dealing with a biological hazard.
Which brings us to Section 3, the science of mitigation, beyond pointing fans at wet carpets.
To really appreciate the tactical response here, we have to look at how professionals classify the enemy. They don't just treat water. They treat the specific category. You've got Category 1, which is your clean water from supply lines. But if you jump to Category 3, that is black water. We're talking pathogens, sewage backups. That immediately triggers strict hazmat protocols and full protective gear. The category totally dictates the science used to fight it. And to fight that battle, the industry relies on a very specific playbook, the IICRC S500 standard. That stands for the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. It is a rigid protocol completely rooted in material science. Mitigation teams are out there doing complex psychrometric calculations. They're factoring in temperature, humidity, material density, and specific gravity just to pull moisture out of surfaces. Because, a solid glass pane dries a whole lot differently than highly porous carpet padding. It replaces total guesswork with mathematical certainty.
Section 4, 3 phases of recovery, the systematic process.
This is where the rubber meets the road, and professionals literally reverse the physics of a flood. It is a strict back-to-back sequence. Step 1, assessment and extraction. Step 2, controlled structural drying, which forcefully evaporates the trapped moisture. And Step 3, restoration and rebuild. If you skip around or scramble these steps, you are absolutely guaranteeing secondary damage down the line.
And the toys they use to execute this? Unbelievable. They deploy this high-tech arsenal. We're talking thermal imaging cameras to spot hidden, invisible pockets of cold water trapped inside walls that look totally dry. Truck-mounted extractors pumping out thousands of gallons an hour. They use low-grain refrigerant dehumidifiers to strip moisture from the air at crazy speeds, all paired with industrial air movers. Like I said, they are fighting this water on a molecular level.
But listen, even with all that crazy technology,
Patience is a scientific necessity here. Controlled drying usually takes a solid 3 to 5 days. Concrete foundations, thick wood framing, they release moisture very, very slowly. Teams actually have to show up daily, tracking the specific gravity of the moisture with specialized meters until they hit the region's exact dry standard. Rushing this, especially with semi-porous stuff, that just guarantees hidden rot and a nasty mold callback a few weeks later.
All right, finally, Section 5, Navigating the Aftermath, Logistics and Realities.
So the science is absolutely fascinating, but we got to address the practical realities of actually living through this kind of disaster. And this is the first question everyone asks when the water starts rising. Can I actually stay in my home during this whole restoration process?
Well, here is the direct, no-nonsense answer. If it's minor, like a Category 1 clean water leak isolated to just one bathroom, yeah, you can usually stay put. But if it's extensive, the whole game changes. If you're dealing with a Category 3 sewage nightmare, multiple wrecked rooms, airborne dust from torn-down walls, or half a dozen incredibly loud industrial air movers running 24/7, yeah, for your own health and sanity, you have to pack your bags and relocate.
And then, of course, there's the ultimate financial question, the one keeping every property owner up at night. Will my homeowner's insurance actually cover the whole shebang? It all hinges on the timeline. Standard policies generally cover sudden and accidental damage. Think of that polybutylene pipe suddenly snapping. What they usually don't cover is gradual damage from long-term neglect, like a slow drip you ignored for 6 months. And here's the kicker. Insurance adjusters don't just take your word for it. They want receipts. They require those precise daily psychrometric moisture logs, the before and after photos, and documented proof that the IICRC standard was followed to the letter before they write that check. The science literally secures the funding.
So we've seen how geography, aging pipes, and the strict physics of moisture all conspire against a building, which leaves me with this final thought for you. With aging infrastructure everywhere and increasingly wild extreme weather patterns, is your property actually prepared to beat that 48-hour clock the next time a pipe bursts? It's a hidden battle of science versus time, and absolutely every minute counts. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.